Foods Market's 24-stem bunch of roses. Skip the reservation and make a sizzling surf and turf with deals on quality steaks, lobster tails, and more. Dessert pro tip? You'll find their chocolate-covered strawberries in the bakery department. Feel the love with delicious savings at Whole Foods Market.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Smith's for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Smith's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
But what else did I know about Jake? Well, I didn't actually know his name, which is interesting. So that was the first time I heard his name. There was kind of a different, we were referring to him kind of a code name, I guess you would call it.
Kind of like Joey is not my name. Kind of like that.
Yeah. I would say my perspective on him up to that point was a person who was definitely high up in one of our top defense contractors. I do know at least one of the defense contractors that he was affiliated with. I do know the location that he refers to as the range. And my impression is he's a person who is trying to figure out a way to support disclosure. And that has changed a number of different ways over the past 2 years. And ultimately has led to what we see now with his formation of Skywatcher and the intention to publicly or privately, publicly, meaning not in government, try to collect evidence of these things that he's claiming.
When it comes to those locations, why can't, and forgive me, maybe Jake has spoken about this. I know he was on Jesse Michaels recently and things like that. Why can't or why won't he release those? Or why have you been asked not to release the different, like where the range is, who the government contractor was that he was working for? We can all assume that it's one of the big names like a Lockheed or Raytheon or Northrop or somebody like that. But why can't that be revealed?
That's a good question. That's really a good question. And honestly, I have not understood why. I feel like there's two conflicting behaviors over the past 2 years. On one side, there's this perspective that it's super secret, it can't be revealed, don't let anyone know where this location is. But on the other hand, from my perspective, I saw Michael go on several podcasts and reveal all sorts of details about the location he was brought to, and that one detail isolated by itself is useless. But if you take 2 years worth of little details from different podcasts and you cultivate that into a single piece of paper and start narrowing it down, that's information that someone could potentially use to figure out where this location is. So I never understood why on one hand it was kind of like secret, but on the other hand, Michael could go, and Greer as well. Greer has said all sorts of stuff about this location. So at this point, I would say my perspective is that it's really not a big deal if people figure it out. Like if people were to guess, and talk about it, it's probably inconsequential. But it's probably, I mean, especially now that Jake is public, I think kind of in the past, it was more like he was still trying to keep his identity secret, because he had, people in the know would associate him specifically with that location, I guess. And so that kind of made sense. But now that he's public, I think it just might be a simple, as simple as like Dopser didn't want him to associate, him acknowledging specifically from his mouth, acknowledging the location. And again, this location is, you can find it in ufology. Like if you dig around in like UFO lore, like this facility is referenced, sightings and things like that. So it's kind of like, I kind of think of it as like, Area 51. Everyone's suspicious of Area 51. You're like, oh man, there's got to be stuff going on there. But it's like, do we have disclosure? No. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, even if people figured it out, it's kind of like, who cares? It doesn't really do anything for us,
Yeah, and so just to be clear, at this location, this is where we're talking about the location. We're talking about where Jake took Mike and where they witnessed the psionic experiments, for lack of a better term, being conducted, right?
Well, I don't think Michael had witnessed that any sort of demonstration or anything like that at the range. He had kind of seen, there was a point where he did see a demonstration, but I don't think it was there. But this location that Jake refers to as the range is where he alleges, when he was working for that company, that organization, where they would essentially use psionic people to summon or invite NHI craft, and he alleges that sometimes they were shot down, right, with EMP weapons, and then they would recover whatever came down. But that's, the facility there where, there's buildings and whatnot, is where Michael was taken.
Are the psionic the psionic abilities that are being used, or again, for lack of a better term, harvested in some ways and put out there, is this more of a defense contractor operation, like black site type thing, or is this authorized by the U.S. government? Like Congress would know about it, the Senate would know about it, the president would know about it. Like, is this like the Pentagon would know about it, or is this more of like, this is just, I guess, to use a comparison, Stranger Things? This is something that's happening maybe not, literally underground, but in a metaphorical sense, underground, outside of the purview of government authorization.
Yeah, I mean, I would have no idea, but I can tell you the allegations are, it seems to be more that it's a rogue organization that is distributed throughout all sorts of organizations. It's not just like one siloed company. It's kind of like a mesh network of people who work in a number of different, private contractors, or three-letter agencies, stuff like that. But again, I have no idea, the legitimacy of any of that.
Sure. And it's interesting because we know for a fact that the CIA and, for that matter, the FBI both looked in and really actually exercised remote viewing. I mean, Joe McMoneagle talks about this a lot in his past. I mean, there's documents on this in the CIA that they used people for remote viewing purposes. So it's not like the three-letter agencies, anyway, haven't delved into this these types of abilities before. It's been going on for quite a while, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that.
So, in that essence, then, let me ask you this, Joey: has Mike partaken in any psionic experiments himself or demonstrations? Has he tried to use any or develop any psionic abilities?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
Okay. What about Jake Barber?
I don't know.
Okay. Fair enough. We know other people on the Skywatcher team have, but that was just something that popped into my head, and it wasn't. I hadn't heard anything about it. So, all that said, when it comes to the ladder here, right? Because there was a conversation that took place over the weekend that I ended up being tagged in on social media, on Twitter, on X specifically, and it kind of talked about, what's the end game here? What's the goal? What does Mike know? Mike was responding to some people, and I was kind of just scrolling through the comments. I'm like, oh boy, where is this going? And I started thinking, I'm going to get to that in a second on what that topic was, because it's a little heavy. But I want to ask first, where's the ladder here? Because Mike is talking during that conversation, during that thread that took place on X over the weekend. Mike is really talking on behalf of himself. He's talking on behalf of Jake and what Jake is trying to do. And it got me thinking, how high does this go? So, does this go to Greer and above, or is Greer like at the top of the ladder here and everything's flowing down through him?
Okay, so the Greer Association.
Is there a Greer Association? I'm assuming.
Okay, so and this is something I think people could kind of recognize publicly. So I'll explain it in a way where you could kind of see this for yourself publicly. Leading up to Jake coming forward with Ross on News Nation, there was a period of about 2 months where Greer was going on all sorts of interviews saying he has Black Project insiders who are defecting. They're coming forward. They're going to issue they're going to drop a bunch of evidence. It's going to be the biggest thing in ufology. And he was hyping that up for like 2 months leading up to Jake's appearance on News Nation. And what did we see happen? We saw, we didn't see a data dump like Greer was hyping. Instead, we saw this person, Jake Barber, coming forward through News Nation and revealing, everything that he's revealed and his intentions and all of that. And so what that means, well, to be perfectly clear, Greer was talking about Jake Barber. Okay. For those 2 months. He was talking about Jake Barber and his team, okay? So why did we not see the data dump that Greer was referring to and hyping up? Like I said, Jake's strategy for his disclosure efforts have taken a number of different turns throughout the past 2 years, and I probably I could only formulate 10% of it, honestly, because I've never spoken to Jake. I don't have any sort of communication. This is just kind of my perspective based on my, conversations with Michael and kind of seeing how things have been, certain things have kind of come forward publicly. There's been a lot of things that have unfolded over the past couple years. One of them that actually you kind of kicked off, which didn't come to fruition, but we won't talk about that one. There was a book. He had issued a book to attempt to prod Dobser, and so that was kind of a very sort of behind the scenes kind of way for him to passively, in a way, stir up information to kind of see what certain agencies knew about classified information. That book was called Sentinels of Ether. So he publicly released a sample of that book, which I had posted to Reddit. Michael had given it to me. I posted it to Reddit. He also gave a copy to Greer, and he published it. So that was kind of one form of Jake's efforts with disclosure. Then it turned into, something else where potentially they were going to go seize certain things from different facilities. That sort of fell through. And, I think honestly, it was due to basically the UAP Disclosure Act being gutted. I think that was a very big surprise that fell through, and there was a sense of disappointment, and that didn't kind of get into the end zone.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that actually, because that was one that that was one that was revealed to me privately, actually, back in October of 23. And Mike had spoken about that with me. I don't think I've ever talked about this before. And well, because now that you bring it up and it fell through, I'll talk about it. But he told me, he's like, yeah, we're gonna go in and we're gonna grab some stuff and we're gonna show proof and we're gonna take pictures. And he showed me some plans that he had, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. And then it didn't. So it sounds like it's one of these things that kind of confused me. I'll be honest with you, Joey. That was something that really kind of turned me off from the Michael Herrera story, if you will. And I don't mean that in a bad way or a negative way toward Mike himself. I would love to talk to him. We've kind of lost touch a little bit over the past year. I would still love to bring him back on or have a conversation off the air, whatever it might be. But that was something that he was so sure about it. And when he told me about it, actually, as we were recording an episode together, and then he said, you know what, take that part out. Do me a favor, delete that part, because I can't put that out there yet. I said, no problem. So I took it out of the show. And then he talked to me about it more behind the scenes and sent me some pictures of here's my gear, here's what I'm using, here's what we're going to be doing. And again, this goes back October of 23, and I was like, wow, this is really something that's going to take place. They're really going to go into these facilities and show proof and show everybody, catastrophic disclosure type thing. And it didn't happen. So that was something that I kept to myself until this very moment in time right now, actually, as I'm talking about it. And it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. So why didn't that happen? Was there an audible, or was Mike himself misled, or was just they had to call an audible because UAP Disclosure Act fell through?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of this topic what was intended to be talked about publicly, but from my perspective, I think whatever degree of that was being planned, I think was dependent upon the eminent domain clause in the UAP Disclosure Act. And I think that was literally it. Once that fell through, I think that was that had to be, put on the shelf. Now, then, so like the other part of Jake's kind of strategy was his relationship with Michael, because Jake for the longest time never intended on coming forward publicly. So
he was using a pen name, right? I forget the name, but he was using a pseudonym.
I wouldn't say it because I don't know if that's sensitive.
Fair enough.
If you do remember it, but
I don't. I remember seeing it somewhere, but I don't remember what it is. I'm sure someone listening right now is screaming at me like, "How did you forget the name? It's this." I'm sorry, I forgot the name.
But yeah, so like he was gonna, and he did. He cultivated a relationship with Michael. Michael was helping him communicate with people in government, and also relaying information, publicly about the program that Jake wanted Michael to relay publicly. Now, the thing that I had always expected was evidence to follow up shortly after, so Jake tells Michael a bunch of information about this program, and then I was expecting oh, cool, 2 weeks, probably within a month, he's got to be showing a photo or video or documents or something, this has got to be coming, right? And so I've been in this perpetual state of expecting that for the past year and a half or whatever, and that never happened. But going back to Greer, this is kind of where we kicked off this thread.
Yeah.
Was how Greer got involved, or where he sits on this whole thing. So a lot of people have this assumption that, because Michael had come forward through Greer, and Jake had been introduced to Michael through Greer, that Greer is like the guy at the top calling the shots or organizing this or whatever. And that is not the case. From my perspective, once Jake had direct communications with Michael, they very quickly had kind of their own direct kind of communications and collaboration. Greer was certainly kept in the loop on certain things, but if you just recognize that leading up to Jake coming forward with Ross, Greer very publicly described a completely different expectation of what he thought was about to happen. And so what does that tell you? That tells you that perhaps Jake hasn't been telling Greer everything about his intentions. And I wonder how did Greer even know that Jake was working with Ross so closely to, because obviously the level of production, or the he had a special on News Nation, there were follow-up interviews, there were other people on the team, like that doesn't happen overnight. It's not like Ross called Jake up and a week later they had that whole thing put together. This is something that took a long time to develop relationships, convince the various people to agree to do this and come forward. So obviously that was something that had been in the works for a long time, yet you had Greer literally up to a week prior to that special coming forward, very publicly describing a completely different understanding of what was about to happen. So I think that right there can tell anybody listening to this that Greer certainly wasn't, orchestrating Jake's intentions or movements or objectives or anything like that. And even if you listen to Jake talk about why he was even at the National Press Club event in 2023, he revealed that he was actually kind of undercover for the FBI to identify legitimate whistleblowers and get them arrested. I mean, he literally said that in the Jesse Michaels interview. So, in a way, it was like Jake was, using that relationship with Greer in order to kind of perform his own analysis of the landscape of the whistleblowers and who's legitimate, who's not. And at that time, he was also contemplating his own intentions on switching sides and becoming a whistleblower himself. So I think, hopefully that kind of gives people an idea of at least my perspective on Greer's, level of involvement.
Yeah, it does help, because I think, man, this is flying by. I still have so many questions to ask you, so hopefully you can stick around a little bit longer.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think, at least for me, my perception has been that Greer kind of, and this isn't, I'm not trying to, talk out of school here, as we say, or, talk behind somebody's back. It's just my observation is that Greer kind of presents himself as this puppet master. And I wonder sometimes how much of that is the actual case, or is it really just a presentation? So, I mean, I guess maybe the overall arching question here is, in your opinion, and you don't have to answer it because I think it's a sensitive question, so I don't want to put you in a bad spot. But in your opinion, in your experience, do you think we should trust Greer when it comes to the information he's putting out there?
Well, it's very hard to know what information is fundamentally true. That's the problem. That's what's challenging with Greer, because I've been in situations where I've learned about something that happened involving Greer, and then 2 weeks later he goes on a podcast and he talks about it. But me knowing and having an understanding and perspective on what unfolded, and then hearing him talk about it, you see the contrast between the basic facts and then kind of the the flourishing and exaggeration and kind of mischaracterization and stuff. and it's sad because, you know, I feel like a lot of times he undermines himself. And to the point where, you know, I mean, he's been doing this for so long. I would not be surprised to find out that perhaps he has been given some very legitimate information to you know, publicly disseminate for the sole reason that they want that information associated with Greer because they know that he's such a controversial figure. And so it's tough. It's really tough. I think another thing with Greer is he, you know, he's been doing this for so long, and I think he has a very clear perspective on how he thinks this whole thing works. And so, you know, a lot of times he'll kind of attribute things very off the cuff and just kind of state it as fact without maybe doing the due diligence and treating that event or whatever as like its own thing that needs to be investigated independently. If it kind of fits his idea of how things work, he'll just kind of give that more credibility and just kind of state it as fact. So it's a few different things with Greer.
Yeah, it's interesting. What piece of information, if you can look at one thing, if you can pinpoint something, and so I would say, you know, Joey, how do you know all this stuff is true? I mean, these things that you've been given the information, and you can say, well, because this happened. What would that be? Where you can point to something and say, man, well, you know, this happened and that verified, you know, points A, B, and C for me. So I knew what I was being told was true.
Well, the only thing I know is true is that Jake brought Michael to that facility. That's really the only thing I've ever attested to. And a lot of people, again, kind of fit, you know, with that binary concept of like, oh, well, if you support Michael about one thing, then you must believe everything he says. And it's like, that's not logical. I don't have evidence of any of the extraordinary stuff that he said. The reason I find it very credible is, you know, I mean, at this point, I do find Jake very credible and his team. You know, I was a little thrown off by his initial kind of portrayal as being like, oh, I'm just a helicopter pilot. But I think he's probably in a very tricky situation with how much he can publicly acknowledge. You know, he's trying to do this through Dopser. And I think you can kind of read between the lines on a lot of things that he says, as well as some of the things that his team says. But ultimately, what matters is the evidence. And they've yet to be able to produce convincing evidence that they're, you know, capturing something that's demonstrating any of the 5 observables. But I think we should all be very open and encouraging of their intentions to capture that evidence and share it publicly. So, you know, that's the big thing, is to just let them do what they're saying they're going to try to do, and let's just be patient.
Yeah, and I know that's a big ask for some people in the UFO community, is patience. Like we said earlier, that instant gratification is such a craving for a lot of people. Who else should we expect to see, or the number? Because Jake has spoken about it before, and even Mike has spoken about it before when it comes to other whistleblowers waiting in the wings. Gosh, I mean, Ross Coulthart has said it. Lou Elizondo has said it. A lot of people have said there's more whistleblowers waiting in the wings. What have you heard on your end in conversations with Mike Herrera, or through the grapevine that Mike has heard from Jake, about these other whistleblowers, other witnesses, whatever term you want to use, that are waiting to come forward?
I don't know. I really have no idea. But I would expect that, you know, someone of Jake's caliber and his team coming forward, I think what's trying to be achieved is a point where, you know, let's say, you know, this black program and all this hidden evidence Let's say all that's real, okay? What I think we're trying to do, not we, but Jake, what Jake's trying to do is get to a point where it becomes inevitable for kind of the government or the black program evidence to make it okay for that to come forward. Because if Jake can prove to the world that, hey, these things are real, we've proved it privately, there's kind of like no reason for the cover-up to continue. So it's I personally kind of view it as this effort to make disclosure comfortable for the public and to make it okay for, like, you know, the kind of the government side of evidence to start coming forward and to kind of destigmatize it. So they're kind of taking that head on. They're pushing through that stigma, and they're trying to produce evidence that makes us all just you know, comfortable for more.
Yeah,
that's my perspective.
No, that's fair. And I want to go back to something I said maybe about 15 minutes ago or so, because we've gone down a lot of roads here. But I alluded to it because I wanted to remind myself that this was important, in my view, to bring up. There is concern about the situations and the techniques that are being used or employed for the those with psionic abilities that would be used in demonstrations, or, again, for lack of a better term, experiments, or just in general to be employed to perform the psionic communication with NHI or NHI craft. And there's been concern that connects Mike's story of human trafficking to what is currently happening. And that was something that I mentioned, this thread that was happening on X over the weekend that I kind of got tied into, that Mike was responding to a lot of different people saying, you know, basically, I mean, there were people saying some pretty, like, you know, harsh stuff against him. You know, trying to say that he's complicit in, like, a cover-up and all these different things. And Mike was explaining himself, I think, very well, actually, and saying that this isn't what they're doing. This isn't what Jake Barber's involved in. This is actually quite the opposite. This is what Jake and I are trying to stop, is any type of illegal operations or human trafficking. So can you speak to that at all, in that to alleviate any misconceptions or worries that, quite frankly, I've had when I was trying to connect the dots? Because that's what we do when we don't have answers. We try to connect our own dots, and you start to think of all these different scenarios. So trying to alleviate some of those concerns that say we're not looking at human trafficking when we're talking about what Skywatcher is doing, what Jake and what Mike are doing, that it's separate from what's happening there.
So, well, first, what I'll say is, you know, I don't think it's justified to express the sort of outrage about that sort of thing without first even establishing whether Mike's story is true at all. You know, like, people kind of like skipped over the whole part of, like, you know, first it was, oh, Mike made up this whole story, and then they went right to, oh, wait, he's trying to cover up human trafficking, without first acknowledging that they believe that there was a 300-foot UFO in the middle of the jungle loading people onto it, right? So, and I think that kind of caught me off guard, and kind of why it's never been something I have personally kind of put attention to or you know, rang the alarm bell on, because, like, I'm still back way, you know, 2 years ago with, like, okay, was Michael a Marine? Was he in Indonesia? Like, I'm still, like, that's where I'm at. I still haven't gotten the proof of the 300-foot UFO. So, like, the whole allegation of people were being transported is not something I've even gotten to yet. So I just want to say that first, to be like, you know, we need to kind of take this chronologically, one step at a time. However, I I can kind of repeat Jake's clarification on the situation. I have no proof of which way it is or whatever, but from what I understand, the idea that Mike stumbled upon a human trafficking operation, obviously immediately people kind of associate human trafficking with like slavery, sex trade, that sort of thing. And when Greer and Michael learned that there were people, so basically, to back up a sec, Michael had witnessed containers being towed by trucks, being pulled up onto this craft and in the jungle. And he had assumed there were drugs because he saw like an HVAC unit on the front of these containers. And when Michael came forward at the press club event, Jake was there. He heard Michael's testimony the day prior to the YouTube video that we see online. So it was a multi-day event. So Jake heard his testimony the first time, and he sent Greer a text and said, "Hey, just so you know, it wasn't drugs, it was people." And so you can imagine, Michael and Greer take that and kind of interpret it how they want. And so, from that, the following day, Michael did his testimony again. That time it was recorded. That's what we see on YouTube. And you can tell there's like this connotation that it was human trafficking, how everyone typically defines it. And then even the Sean Ryan show that Michael did was prior to Michael meeting Jake in person when he flew out there. So he kind of continues that same idea. And so once Michael had met with Jake in person, Jake explained that it wasn't human trafficking in that sense. It was a recruitment operation to screen people for this psionic ability, and they are willingly, they're asked if they would want to leave their life behind and come into this program, and they're brought into this black program where they can perform these feats and experiments and stuff like that. Now, so on one hand, you have this explanation that like, they go willingly, they're taken care for, they have food, shelter, security, all that. But I think, no matter how you look at it, that's still exploitation. I mean, you're showing up to someone with their house just fell down from an earthquake, and you're saying, "Hey, totally voluntary, but if you come with me, I'll give you a place to live and shelter and take care of your kids, and you education for your kids, and you can, and we'll, give you a good life." I mean, that's still exploitation, right? Right. And then, beyond that, there's also, Michael has also relayed that, at least early on in the program, there were some of the psionic people had died through part of the experimentation process and kind of learning how to interface with all this stuff. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, where there's certainly some bad stuff that has happened that needs to be investigated. I don't think that's trying to be covered up. I think we're just starting the conversation on the whole topic. And I do know, there are some efforts behind the scenes to kind of address that sort of stuff. But again, I don't think it's really surprising or unreasonable that some people misinterpreted it as, slavery, sex trade type human trafficking. And there might be that sort of stuff happening, unrelated. But yeah, I think that thread that you're talking about on X, it was like this connotation like, they're trying to cover it up and just sweep it under the rug. I don't think that's what was happening.
Yeah, and to Mike's point, did you see the thread?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was tagged in it too.
You were? Okay. I was trying to remember. It was very interesting keeping up with that one over the weekend. And to his point, and since you saw it too, you could again, I think he defended himself well in trying to clarify those different points and those concerns. And funny enough, I got to tell you, it's ironic how the universe works sometimes, in that I had reached out to you a week or two ago privately, just, say, hey, would you like to come on? Let's talk about some of these things. And I hadn't thought about bringing any of this up. This was not my intention when I first reached out to you. And then as the few days went on, I saw some different information coming out about Jake Barber, and I think it was after he was on Jesse Michaels, actually. And that's when they started to talk a little bit more about the techniques that are used to gain psionic abilities, or to use psionic abilities. And there was some in there that raised some red flags for me personally, talking about using traumatic experiences and different things like that. I mean, that's how you get adrenochrome, quite frankly, is, heightening that fear and using trauma. And so when I read that, I'm like, oh boy, that's kind of alarming. And then I started to kind of put myself two and two together about what Mike had said on my show back in October of 23 about the trafficking aspect. And he knows that people have died during these demonstrations or trainings to use psionic abilities. And I thought at that point, and I'll be completely honest here, Joey, I'm saying things that I haven't expressed before on UAP. Because it's been uncomfortable, quite frankly, and I wasn't really sure what to make of this stuff over the past year and a half. And after Jake came out and started talking about these things, it kind of sent a chill down my spine, because it led me back to what Mike said on my show. And I thought, my gosh, if what he was saying was true, then people are dying. Like, that's not good, and something has to be done about this. So before you came on the show, and before that threat happened, I was actually going to go on X myself and raise the question. And I think it was on that Saturday. I'll go even further. And I hate to do this because I'm supposed to be interviewing you and now I'm taking up your time. But quite frankly, I probably could have saved this for the outro, but I want to talk to you about it. It kept me up at night. This, that's always a cliche. Oh, this keeps you up at night. I couldn't fall asleep this past Friday night because that thought popped into my head that something was happening here, and that what Mike had said on my show a year and a half ago rang true. And then I was like, oh no, I have to bring this up, and I don't know how to do that. And I was actually going to go on X that Saturday, just a few days ago here as we speak, on February 1st. I was going to go on and write a post saying, hey, we spoke about this. I was going to tag Mike. I was going to tag Jake. I was going to tag you and say, we spoke about this. You guys need to answer for this. What is going on? And before I did that, it actually ended up getting brought up in that thread. So it's funny how things kind of work out. And then Mike ended up answering the questions that I had in my head without me even having to ask them. So I don't know about you, but it made me feel a little bit better that he was able to articulate, that's a misunderstanding. We know those things are going on, and we're trying to stop them. Am I reading that right, do you think? How did you read all that once we went through it all?
Well, this is just really why I feel like this is too important to just dismiss. Aside from the whole connotations of ufology and learning about consciousness and all this stuff, there's certainly criminal allegations that have been made. And for people to just dismiss Michael's whole story, or Jake for that matter, I think is irresponsible. Another thing that we haven't even brought up is, there have been allegations that during these operations where they're shooting down craft, there have been situations where civilian aircraft have either stumbled upon restricted airspace accidentally or something, and there's allegations that they shoot those airplanes down and get rid of the evidence. And for me, I'm just like a regular, I was a Redditor, anonymous guy, just casually interacting with the UFO subreddit. I would dig into cases here and there that I just found interesting, and then here I am finding myself wrapped up in investigating what could potentially be crimes. And so I drew a line for me personally. I'm not like I don't work in law enforcement. I don't work in government. So like it was just uncomfortable for me to kind of look into those sorts of allegations myself. But what I did do is try to advocate for other people to get involved with investigating this, and that was really my only objective with trying to be so vocal about saying like, hey guys, Michael's not lying about being flown to this facility. I just wanted people to help kind of put attention and investigate it. And yeah, it's important because yeah, there are alleged crimes that have happened as well.
Yeah, and hopefully we get some answers in it. You know, if that's the work that Mike and Jake and Skywatcher team and other people behind the scenes are trying to do and trying to stop those things, we can only hope that they're successful in doing that. And I mean, I hate to put you, like I said, I hate to put you on the spot in a bad position. I know you can't, read Mike Herrera's mind or Jake Barber's mind. And like I said, I would love to talk to either one of them, have Mike back on the show again, and I'll ask him these same questions and even more. If he's willing to do that, if you'd like to pass along the message, then by all means. If he's willing to come back on and answer some of these tough questions that I think are justified in asking, quite frankly, and because these are legitimate concerns. So I'm glad we can at least get it out there initially and acknowledge that these questions are out there, acknowledge what Mike had to say over the weekend, which I think helped, at least in my mind, as far as, what they're trying to do in their overall mission. But it's heavy stuff, man. And, there's more than just an egg UFO and some cool stories about, psychically connecting to aliens. Like there's real deal stuff here involved.
Right. And there's allegations that whistleblowers have been silenced as well. So there are definitely allegations that need to be investigated.
Absolutely. Before we're done here, and I'll get you out here. Sorry to make it so heavy. My goodness. But before we are done, actually, there's two more questions. I'm just looking at my sheet here, and I probably touched on maybe four of them because we went down some different roads that probably worked out for the best in all. I want to ask you first, before we get to the end, who in government is involved? And I ask that in terms of Mike has said that he has briefed people within the Trump administration and that it is verified. I think you verified it, actually. Yeah. Correct me, right? That he did speak with people who are currently in the Trump administration, high-ranking officials, briefing them on this. Can we talk about that as far as who might be involved, or, how close are they to the president, these people that Mike are talking to?
Okay, so what I can say is, yes, I was aware that Michael was set up for a meeting to fly out and brief members of the Trump administration. That happened several weeks ago. And Michael had sent me a selfie that he took with one of the individuals. I'll say that it's a very high-ranking Trump administration individual who probably every adult in America would immediately recognize. And it was at a facility. It was at a location that an exclusive location that's associated with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So obviously, I don't know what they talked about, but he was definitely there. He said he was going to be there, and he was there. So I have no reason to doubt that he has, spoken about this topic with the Trump administration. And interestingly, you can kind of read into it. Ross, before the special came out, he was on Donald Trump Jr.'s podcast.
Right.
So that kind of gives an indication to me as well that, yeah, they kind of are aware of the situation.
Who is what are they interested in, the Trump administration? Is Trump himself interested? I don't know if you know that answer. I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
I don't know. I really don't know.
But what are they interested in? as far as why they would bring in Michael? Is it the psionic portion of the story? Is it just his story in general? How are they taking people? How are they talking to people to, ask if they want to come into these programs, or is it the NHI aspect? All of the above.
It could be that. It could be, and this is just speculation. It could simply be a broader perspective on corruption, and I think we're seeing that play out in front of our eyes with the actions that the president is taking in his efforts to undermine and root up what he refers to as the deep state, what everyone refers to as the deep state. So it could be a fundamental interest of the broader kind of rogue actions that are being taken under the guise of official government activity.
Yeah. Before we're done, now this is the last question.
Sure.
I promise. Unless you say something that's makes a spark in my head go off, but
yeah,
you never know. Where do you see this ending at this moment, Joey? How do you see this progressing? I guess twofold question. Have you been given a timeline as far as where do they want to go with this and when, and versus where do you see this going, how and when?
No, I don't have any knowledge of kind of the plan. I basically, like, at this point, what everyone is seeing with Jake publicly doing the interviews and all that stuff, that's the extent of my knowledge as well. So I don't want to make it seem like I know more than that. My interpretation of what they're trying to do, again, I think it's I don't necessarily agree with the kind of angle that they're approaching this, as far as like the production. Like, I watched their first episode of Skywatcher, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of felt weird. I'll be honest.
It's a little reminiscent of how, and I'm not trying to knock anybody here. Again, this is just an observation. It's a little reminiscent of how Lou Elizondo came out. Remember, Lou Elizondo came onto the scene. I don't know if you remember this off the top of your head, but he came onto the scene in a History Channel show as part of like this disclosure show, and that's where Christopher Mellon came from. Tom DeLonge was involved with it, and they would sit in like this round table and talk about disclosure and what the government knows. I had no idea who Lou Elizondo was. I was really just starting to, I wouldn't say dive in. I was already into the topic, but when Lou Elizondo came out on the History Channel, I was like, who is this guy? And I mean, this guy's like the real deal. And then he added Christopher Mellon in there and all these other guys on the show. And I was like, this is pretty wild. So it's kind of reminiscent of that, in my opinion anyway, on how Jake Barber is presenting this. It seems, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems calculated. It seems very calculated, going on Ross.
Well, yeah, I mean,
specials, talking to Jesse Michaels, all these different things.
Yeah, I mean, the interviews that Alex
Klokas, right?
Yeah, he performed on that first episode. Kind of felt rehearsed, in my opinion. And he was asking the same questions. What's your percentage of confidence? He's asked that to Carl Nell and Gary Nolan, and it's just, I don't know. Like, it kind of felt weird to me. Again, I'm coming from this perspective of like wishing and expecting evidence like a year and a half ago. So the evidence that we saw with the News Nation special, for instance, like the egg, being carried under a helicopter, it's like we don't even know that thing can fly from that video. Like, if you just take that video in and of itself, like, we don't even know that thing can fly, yet it's being alluded to that it's proof of NHI craft, so I would have rather have seen a much stronger, definitive piece of evidence brought out first, from the start. Let that go viral for a few days, get everyone's attention, and then introduce the psionic angle and all of that. I think that would have probably been received a lot better. I mean, it's hard for me to even have conversations about this, what's been unfolding, with friends and family. Like for me personally, like I feel weird about being like, oh yeah, check out this video. Like, cause it's very hard for, your normal everyday person who's not tuned into this topic at all to listen to, be introduced to like, oh yeah, the psionics, we summon craft, NHI craft, when we haven't even established that NHI craft are like real, So I feel like we need to show that evidence first, establish that from a more nuts and bolts perspective, and then, but obviously it's all water under the bridge at this point. So I'm at a point where and again, I don't want this to come off as if I'm doubting Jake, because I still find him extremely credible, and I don't I don't think this is all a ruse or anything like that, but I just don't agree with the presentation on how this is unfolding. And not that it matters. I'm just a single person here, and I'm trying to just step back and watch this all unfold. I'm keeping an open mind. I'm very much a nuts and bolts kind of person. I need to see it and touch it, and that's kind of how I am. I've never had an experience. I'm not an experiencer or anything like that. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm just giving them time to let their story breathe and give them the opportunity to present the evidence that they are trying to collect and share with the world.
Patience, right? That's I guess that's the theme for today's show is questions and patience. So
yeah.
I appreciate you having patience with me today, Joey, and sticking around so long, for giving so much of your time here today for the show and for people to listen to. I thought it was a really interesting conversation, which is why I went so long. Really enjoyed that. So thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, dude, definitely. Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Absolutely. We'll talk again soon. We'll keep in touch.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you again to Joey for coming on here and going through all that and answering all those questions. And by the way, I know we were going to bring it up, but I never got to, and why he goes by a fake name. Just really as simple as he wanted to protect his identity. Obviously, as you heard there, it's a heavy discussion. There's a lot of things that go into it. There's a lot of people out there who may not like some things that are being said, and he felt more comfortable not using his real name when he decided to come out in the public and started to talk about these things. So really just as simple as that. So in case you're wondering why I keep calling him Joey, even though that's not his real name, that's why. Other than that, there's really not a lot to add here today. When it comes to that interview, I think we covered a lot of ground. We brought up a lot of questions. I'll reiterate something that I said to Joey while we were talking, which was the push that I feel, and not from anybody. I want to make that clear. No one's pushing me to do anything. It's the push that I feel within myself, in my own instincts, I guess, if you will, to talk again with Michael Herrera. So I want to put that out there publicly. That is my desire to do that. Hopefully he agrees to do it, and if so, then he'll be back here on the show at some point, but I'm going to try to make that happen. I feel that, again, that push within myself, that it feels like that's something that would be beneficial to have a discussion and get some of these questions and get some of these answers out there in what is a pretty incredible situation that we see right now when it comes to Jake Barber and Michael Herrera and the claims that are being made. So I would like to do that interview, and I'll keep you updated on whether or not that interview is going to happen. And also Jake Barber, for that matter. I mentioned Michael Herrera because that's somebody that I have a history with, but sure, Jake Barber, if whoever is handling that account, if you will, then by all means, let's make that happen too, because again, a lot of questions. So aside from that, I do want to mention just one or two things here real quick before we're done. One of them is really just keeping an eye on something that I find intriguing. Anna Paulina Luna, we know her as part of the Disclosure Caucus, as I like to say. We have like Jared Moskowitz in there, Nancy Mason, Tim Burchett, some of these Congress people who have brought up the topic of UAPs, UFOs publicly and asked these questions during the congressional hearings. Well, there's a lot of rumors going around, and we'll see what ends up happening here. But as we speak today, okay, I need to date this because if you hear it after something goes down, you're going to say either I sound silly or that already happened. One way or the other, it's going to sound dated. So as of today, on February 4th, I can tell you that Anna Paulina Luna tweeted out, I will be joining at POTUS, of course, President of the United States, tomorrow on February 5th for the signing of a very important executive order. Now, couple that with a tweet that she sent out on the 3rd, on Monday, saying that I have an announcement next week that will impact the entire nation. Press conference date will be announced soon. And then Jared Moskowitz, who I just mentioned, commented on the bottom saying, I know, period. So now there's a ton of speculation as to what is happening here. The only thing that I find weird is that in her original tweet, she said something that's going to happen next week. And then she writes today that it's happening tomorrow. So maybe information changed. Like we said there with Joey, sometimes information changes, situations change. Maybe that's the circumstance here, and whatever she was talking about yesterday is the thing that's going to be happening tomorrow with this signing with President Trump for an executive order. I don't know, but it's just a lot of people are finding this very intriguing, including myself, when you have two members of the Disclosure Caucus with Anna Paulina Luna and Jared Moskowitz commenting on a big announcement, and now all of a sudden she's going to be there for an executive order signing. We'll see if this has anything to do with the UFO discussion. It may not have anything to do with it at all. And like I said, if you're listening to this after the fact, I either sound silly or it's going to sound old. But one way or the other, I just wanted to put that out there right now as of today on February 4th. That's something that is going on. Other than that, some great stuff to look forward to still this week after you recover from this conversation. And I'm going to be talking with Jeff Nusatelli. If you don't know the name, he has an incredible story. He's been spoken about on Joe Rogan. James Fox referenced his story on Joe Rogan. He's been on an interview with Ryan Graves. Ryan Graves has interviewed him about his story. It's just absolutely fascinating. And if you're not familiar with his story, then you will be, because he will be speaking with me here on the show in just a few days. So stick around for Jeff Nusatelli because, man, I can't wait to talk to him. Just an awesome story. Really cool guy. We've been talking behind the scenes for the past week or so now, and really looking forward to getting into the public sphere with him and getting his story out there and asking the questions involved. Unbelievable stuff. If you haven't heard his story, it was very widely documented and never debunked, never refuted, but kind of like a modern day, well, maybe not to that extent. I was going to say Bob Salas, but a similar type of situation, except not with nukes. You'll see. It's coming up here next on UAP, so stick around for that in the next few days. Until then, be sure to continue to follow along on social media at UA Podcast 850. A lot going on there. If you want to follow along on social media at UA Podcast 850, especially on Twitter, on X there, a lot happening there on the old Twitter handle of at UA Podcast 850. And if you want to reach out to me directly, it's sdieneruap@gmail.com. That's sdieneruap@gmail.com. If you would like to do that, send a direct message. I will respond to you, maybe not right away, but I promise I will respond. And the same goes for any direct messages on social media as well. But thank you for sticking around today. I know this was a long one, and so I very much appreciate you sticking around to the end. And hopefully you enjoyed all this. It was really quite something. I really enjoyed that discussion. And still so many questions I have in my head. Like I said, hopefully we can get answered at a later date. So until next time, on that note, thank you all again for everything. Because your support truly does mean the world to me. Truly, truly it does. So thank you. But until next time, it's Stephen Diener here saying be well. Thanks so much. We'll talk again soon right here on UAP, the Unidentified Alien Podcast.
This episode is brought to you by the 2025 Lincoln Aviator SUV. The 2025 Lincoln Aviator nails that feeling of next level confidence. The updated grille and sleek lights, total head turners. Under the hood, a refined twin turbo V6 powers you through with authority. Inside, pure comfort. Plush 3-row seating, custom climate control, available massage seats keep you ready to tackle whatever's next. Explore more at Lincoln.com. Some models, trims, and features may not be available or may be subject to change. Check with your local retailer for current information. Lincoln and Aviator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
This episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Didn't file with TurboTax last year? That's in the past. Now, Taxes is getting the TurboTax app and filing your own taxes for free if you didn't file with them last year. File by February 18th. All tax forms, all 100% free. Now, this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. New filers and filers who didn't use TurboTax last year only must start and file your own taxes in-app by February 18th. Excludes TurboTax Live. Full terms at TurboTax.com.
Welcome back into UAP for episode 109. Stephen Diener back with you here as always on the Unidentified Alien Podcast, and happy to be back with you for what turned out to be really quite the deep discussion, and hopefully you're ready for it here today as I speak with a man known as Joey is not my name, even though I end up calling him Joey throughout the episode. Joey is a man who was close with Michael Herrera, well, still is. And I consider him an insider, but he's a little bit modest about it, and that's fine. And you'll hear us go into that a little bit to start off. But Joey, like me, was somebody who was in contact with Michael Herrera from an early stage in his whistleblower, I guess, disclosures and his coming out going back to June of 2023. And if you're not familiar with the story, I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer before we get into it, because we don't really, well, I shouldn't say that. You do get a little bit of an explanation, but I'll still give you a tiny bit of an explanation if you're not, for whatever reason, familiar with Michael Herrera or his story, because he came out in June of 2023 during Dr. Stephen Greer's, and that's important to note as well, during Dr. Stephen Greer's disclosure conference that he had in Washington, D.C. And after that, so he told this story about how when he was in the Marines, he was in the jungles of Asia, and he came across some type of secret operation with this 300-foot, UFO-looking type of craft, and they were loading people onto it, and he thought it was some type of, or they were loading. He didn't see what they were loading onto it, but he thought it was some type of like drug smuggling operation. You'll hear us go into all this. But he saw them using this technology of like a UFO, and he thought, well, we're using some type of, futuristic technology, some type of reverse engineered tech. And he came later to find out that they weren't loading drugs, they were loading people onto this UFO. And that's really where things kind of picked up in Michael Herrera's story. He came back, he's been on my show twice. The last time he was on was in October of 2023. And Mike spoke about being taken to a secret location from an insider, as he called him. And we found out who that insider was. And if you don't know the history of that, you're also going to hear that in this episode. So stay tuned if you don't know who Michael Herrera's insider was. But this insider, I won't spoil the surprise, this insider took Mike to an undisclosed location, a facility where they were performing, or where they do perform, psionic experiments. And they bring people who have psionic abilities or who are wanting to learn psionic abilities to come into contact with NHI and their craft. So his claim on my show back then was that there was some real shady stuff happening with this, and that in fact people were dying who in some cases, they couldn't handle the rigorous training or the rigorous techniques that were used in order to gain these psionic abilities. And that's a pretty big claim to make, an extreme claim to make, but that's a claim that Mike made on my show a year and a half ago. And since then, a lot has happened. in this area. Jake Barber came out. Jake Barber's talked about psionics with Ross Coulthart, and of course the egg-shaped UFO. But for me, that was the least of that story. That's just my opinion. So since then, we have found out that Mike Herrera and Jake Barber are actually working together. And Jake Barber reached out to Mike Herrera while Mike had come out with his story and, was waiting to become a whistleblower himself. And of course, we know about Jake Barber at this point as far as being the latest whistleblower and recovering the egg-shaped UFO and having a psychic connection to it and having the Skywatcher group and trying to gain, using people with psionic abilities to gain communication with these craft and their occupants. So that's kind of the backstory about this discussion that you're about to hear and how this all comes together, how Jake Barber and Michael Herrera came together, and what that means for this overarching discussion of people with psionic abilities, how they're being used, and how they're being acquired, and how they're being taught these abilities. So there's a lot that goes into this. As you can see, it was a longer discussion, but we really went in a lot of different facets and sidewalks here as we were putting all the pieces together. And credit to Joey's Not My Name. I asked some pretty tough questions, and he wasn't shy about trying to answer them as best as he could.